Though the process of fossilization is quite rare, over millions of years, nature has actually hidden large numbers of these treasures across the world. Typically, it is the paleontologists who set out to uncover such specimens. Yet at the same time, it's not uncommon for construction workers, miners, or random people to simply stumble upon them. This raises the question, did people in the past also encounter fossils? And if they did, what on earth did they think? So today, let's see if the Romans met the dinosaurs. You can learn much more about the field of paleontology through our sponsor Wondrium. Wondrium offers subscription-based on-demand videos covering a huge range of subjects from history to science, travel, art, hobbies, and more. These come delivered in a variety of packages, from your more academic courses to well-produced documentaries, exclusives, and more. Their platform has long been my go-to source for background research while making my own documentaries, and I've learned a ton. In particular, their series Introduction to Paleontology, hosted by Dr. Stuart Sutherland, was particularly instructive for our episode today. Its 24 parts cover a huge range of topics, from the basics of geological scale to fossil formation, taxonomy, and more. Episode 16 on dinosaur interpretations is especially revelatory, as it shows how even modern researchers can have trouble piecing together the clues from our past. My mind was blown by the sheer amount of work that has gone into bringing us the knowledge we enjoy today. Right now, Wondrium is offering a free trial, which you can start by clicking the link in the description below or visiting wondrium.com/invicta. I highly recommend that you take a look at what they have to offer and dive into the material that you are most interested in. Enjoy! I figured it would be helpful to start our discussion on the subject of fossils themselves. The term fossil is actually quite broad in its definition, encompassing any preserved remains, impressions, or traces of ancient organisms. Given our level of expertise and technology today, all of these scraps of evidence prove vital in piecing together the clues from the past. However, in antiquity, we must imagine that the more subtle fossils were easily overlooked by our ancestors in favor of the more flashy specimens, which today draw modern audiences to museum exhibits. Therefore, in this video, we will be primarily focused on the big guns of paleontology, namely the fossilized bones of large creatures. So how did these even get created in the first place? Well, the basic idea is that there has to be some means of preservation which connects the original organism to our time today. Getting from A to B, though, can take many different paths depending on the material type and the environment. The most traditional depiction of so-called stone fossil formation is permineralization. It involves the animal being buried in sediment shortly after death. This helps stave off scavengers and decomposition. Under the right conditions, waterborne minerals can enter the cavities of the organism, eventually crystallizing and taking the place of the original material. This will typically occur around ancient sources of water, like rivers, lakes, and ocean beds. However, fossilization can occur through other mediums like ash, tar, resin, and permafrost, which may be able to preserve more of the organic material. Yet other paths result in impressions, casts, molds, and remineralization. Some processes take thousands of years, while others take far less than that. Studies have even shown that the right material, under the right conditions, can even be fossilized in a matter of weeks. But this is just the first part in a fossil's journey. If they ever get preserved in the first place, they must then manage to survive against the elements over the millennia. Here, they might face destruction from any number of threats like gradual weathering or sudden upheaval. Thus, only a tiny fraction of organisms from the past make it into our world today in any recognizable form. But even with such slim odds, there are bound to be survivors when you consider the trillions of creatures which have existed over the millions of years of Earth's history, and the fact that almost all land was at one point underwater. Thus, it should be no surprise then that we eventually end up stumbling upon many of these fossils today. And on the geological scale, our today is pretty much the same time as the yesterday of antiquity, and so we should expect that ancient people were also bumping into fossils of their own. But beyond conjecture, what sort of evidence do we have of this actually happening? Well, we actually have a lot of evidence. So much so that I've actually had to cut a lot of it from this script. Admittedly, much of it comes in the form of written records, but the most concrete evidence we have does indeed come in a physical form. For instance, the ancient Egyptians appear to have regularly collected and offered bones to Set, god of the deserts. We know this because researchers have found deposits and linen-wrapped bones at his various temples. In one region alone, more than 3 tons of these have been discovered. Once examined in a lab, these black bones of Set revealed not just the presence of contemporary animals, but also the petrified remains of extinct species dating back tens of thousands of years, and in some cases, even millions of years. Owing to Egypt's dry environment, it was apparently quite common for people to stumble on all kinds of fossils. This was especially true in areas prone to sandstorms, where for thousands of years people had ventured out to mine natron for the mummification process. Here is how the 2nd century Greek writer Phlegon of Tralles puts it, quote, "In Nitri in Egypt, bodies are exhibited that are unencumbered and plain to see. The bones do not lie mixed together in disorder, but are arranged in such a manner that a person viewing them recognizes some as thigh bones, and others as shin bones, and so on with the other limbs." The far-traveling Herodotus has more to say on the types of finds across the ancient world. Though many of his tales are obviously false or exaggerated, such as his claim that India was home to giant gold-mining ants, some appear to have had a seed of truth. For instance, he writes that, quote, "In Arabia, opposite Buto, I went to try and get information about flying snakes. On my arrival, I saw skeletons and spines in incalculable numbers. They were piled in heaps, some were big and others smaller." This seems fairly consistent with the reports of other contemporaries in the region, as well as the findings of more modern researchers in these sorts of dry environments. In addition, Herodotus also describes other types of fossil remains which were encountered. For instance, on the hills of Egypt, he discovered the remains of shells and mollusks, from which he inferred that the land must once have been underwater. In Scythia, he mentions how the locals told of a rock with imprints 3 times as large as any man's. Apparently, distant India was also home to many fossil discoveries. Here's how Philostratus puts it, quote, "The land is girt with dragons of enormous size. Not only are the marshes full of them, but the mountains as well, and not a single ridge is without one. The dragons of the foothills have crests, of moderate height when young, but they grow with them and extend to a great height when they reach full size. The bodies of plains dragons are sometimes found with elephants, a great reward for hunters. Their tusks resemble those of swine, but more twisted and sharp. They say that in the skulls of the mountain dragons are stored stones of flowery colors that flash out all kinds of hues. They also tell us that a great many dragon skulls are enshrined in the center of the great city of Paraka, close by the mountain." As we broaden our search, it turns out that ancient authors drop continuous hints of fossil discoveries in their works. While it will be impossible to relay them all, I wanted to at least give you a sense of the scope of these anecdotes. A mound broke open in a storm near a small city in Upper Lydia, and some bones appeared. A figure resembling Pan was found inside a slab of rock split open in a Chios quarry. When a mountain in Crete was cleft by an earthquake, a skeleton 46 cubits long was found. Around Munda, there are stones that contain the likeness of a palm branch, which appears when they are split open. In Iberia, various stones resemble the trunk of an oak, or look as though they contain millet, grains, fish bones, ivy leaves, scorpions, and tree roots. The Gedrosi, who live by the river Arabis, make the doorways of their houses out of the monster's jaws and use their bones for roof beams, many of them 40 cubits long. The governor of Gaul wrote to Augustus that a large number of dead Nereids were seen on the shore. During the rule of Tiberius, in an island off the coast of the province of Gaul, the ocean revealed more than 300 monsters of marvelous variety and size. Long after the Battle of Plataea, people used to scour the fields for valuables and bones. They found a seamless skull and a jaw which had a continuous ridge of bone in lieu of teeth, and a 7.5-foot long skeleton. About 4 years ago, Hymneos of Skopelos, a friend of mine, and his son found a similar wonder on the island of Ikos. While digging up some vines, the earth rang under the shovel. When they cleared away the dirt, there lay exposed a skeleton 18 feet tall. When the Carthaginians were surrounding their territory with trenches, they found in the course of their digging 2 giant bodies. In the Cimmerian Bosphorus, there was a sudden earthquake that tore open a ridge and discharged huge bones. The skeletal structure was 24 cubits. The local people then cast the bones into the Maeotis Sea. Such reports seem quite consistent with the discovery of fossils in our own time, where nature brings them to the surface, or when we inadvertently dig down to find them. However, we should still remain skeptical when it comes to the veracity of these reports, which are rife with exaggeration. This danger was actually something that people in the past were wary of as well. Fascinatingly, the author Philostratus remarks on this, saying, quote, "But even if you doubt these stories because they happened so long ago, it's hard to contradict events of our own day. Recently, an excavation on the banks of the Orontes River brought to light Ariades, a giant 45 feet tall. And less than 50 years ago, Sigeum, across the Hellespont, disgorged on one of its headlands the body of a giant. I myself sailed to Sigeum to witness exactly what had happened to the land as well as the giant's size. Many others sailed there too, from the Hellespont, Ionia, and all the islands and Aeolia. The huge body was visible on the cape for 2 months." Naturally, people would often seek to collect such fossils. They seemed to show up quite often in temples, but there were many others who showed interest in them as well. In this regard, it seems that the Roman military commanders were quite fond of scooping them up on their expeditions to foreign lands. Here is how Plutarch describes one such incident, where the general Sertorius captured Tingis in Mauritania, where the giant Antaeus was supposedly buried. Quote, "Skeptical because of the enormous size of the burial mound, Sertorius had his men dig it up. It is said that the skeleton was 60 cubits long. Sertorius was dumbfounded, and, after offering a sacrifice, he reburied the skeleton. He personally confirmed the local story, and paid honors to Antaeus." Other commanders were certainly less polite. Pliny notes that in the east, quote, "the skeleton of the monster Catus was transported by Marcus Scaurus from the town of Joppa in Judea, and shown at Rome among the rest of the marvels of his aedaleship. It was 40 feet long, the height of the ribs exceeding the elephants of India, and the spine was 1.5 inches thick." Roman emperors too were avid collectors, and no expense was spared. Augustus, for instance, is reported to have had his own private gallery. Here is how Suetonius puts it, quote, "At Capri, he had collected the huge skeletons of long-dead sea and land monsters, popularly known as giant's bones, and the weapons of ancient heroes." This habit may have begun early in his career, when, following the Battle of Actium, the future emperor's victorious troops had brought back the legendary tusks of the Caledonian boar. Pausanias tells us that upon examination, their circumference was 3 feet. These relics were apparently dedicated in a special garden of Dionysius, which was themed after the mythical hunt of this beast. Perhaps in commemoration of this, we see silver coins being minted around this time, with the boar on the reverse. Augustus' successor Tiberius carried on this interest in fossils. He apparently expanded the complex at Capri, and likely would have added to the fossil museum himself. The author Phlegon reports one particularly remarkable detail about this collection. Following a series of earthquakes, quote, "In the cracks of the earth, huge skeletons appeared. The local people were reluctant to move them, but as a sample, they sent to Rome a tooth from one of the bodies. It was greater than a foot long. The delegates showed it to Tiberius, and asked if he wished the hero to be brought to him. Tiberius devised a shrewd plan, such that, while not depriving himself of a knowledge of the hero's size, he avoided the sacrilege of robbing of the dead. He thus summoned a certain geometer, Pulcher by name, and bade him fashion a face in proportion to the size of the tooth. The geometer estimated how large the entire body as well as the face would be by means of the weight of the tooth, hastily made a construction, and brought it to the emperor. Tiberius, saying that the sight of the model was sufficient, sent the tooth back to where it had come from." Given how much we struggle today to make modern reconstructions from ancient fossils, I shudder on behalf of paleontologists to imagine the monstrosity which the Romans must have conjured up in the attempt to bring the past to life. This brings up an interesting question. What did ancient people even think about all these fossils? And could such discoveries have influenced their mythologies? Are mammoth skulls the inspiration for cyclopses? Are triceratops the source for dragons? We'll be diving into that rabbit hole in our second episode. For now, I wanted to conclude this video with the following commentary. Based on everything we've discussed so far, it seems clear that the people of antiquity were quite familiar with the discovery of fossils, both through indirect reporting and direct exposure. Though again, I want to wave a giant red flag here. I use the term fossil in the broad sense of being just some preserved evidence of past life. Using a more specific definition would be problematic, and it would be irresponsible for me to claim that any one story is proof that the Romans definitively dug up things like dinosaur fossils. Consider the following sequence of events. Some original creature dies, traces of it are fossilized, these bits erode and get scattered over the millennia, someone finds them, someone reports this, the story gets passed along and translated over thousands of years, we read about it today, And finally, I make a video and take creative liberties in what art should accompany the script to best excite our audience. How likely is it then that we are anywhere near guessing what was actually dug up in the first place? And was it even dug up at all? After all, these reports of findings often read like fishermen's tales, with preposterously large dimensions that exceed anything in the known record today. In addition, such stories often mention the bones as being found alongside enormous coffins or gigantic desiccated human bodies, which, for sure, cannot be true. So where does this leave us? Well, certainly it's possible that some Romans dug up something like a T-Rex skull, but we can't say for sure whether this was or was not the case. If that leaves you a bit disappointed and you'd like to indulge in a bit of fantasy with me, then check out this awesome shirt that the art team made, which captures the essence of the way I wish history really was. Also, be sure to head on over to our Patreon to grab some art downloads for the episode. A huge thanks to the patrons for funding the channel. We couldn't do it without your support. A big thanks also to the researchers, writers, and artists who put this episode together. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and join us in part 2 as we discuss how fossil discoveries may have influenced ancient mythology.